Welcome to Cora's Cottage, where things are homegrown and handmade. I started my journey in town on a small city lot where I grew a garden and preserved most of what I grew. While I was in town, I continued to learn kitchen and other homemaking skills. However, recently, my husband and I have had the opportunity to move out into the country. This means we have more space, and I will be expanding my garden and preservation skills this summer. I want to continue to expand my homesteading and homemaking skills as well. Follow along with me on this journey as I share what I learn. I've made my own homemade sauerkraut a couple times before, but I have never made it from my own cabbage that I have grown. If you've been around for any of my garden tours, you know that I have been patiently waiting for my cabbage heads to get a little bit bigger, and that just hasn't happened, and the bugs are starting to get to them. So I decided that despite them being small for what I wanted, I went ahead and harvested them. And I'm going to turn them into some sauerkraut. So here I'm just rinsing off any dirt or anything else that may have gotten on them, and I'm peeling off the outer layers that are tough from those cabbage leaves that you wouldn't want to eat. And I am having to go a little bit deep on some of these just because of the damage that the bugs have already done to them. I waited a little too long, and the bugs have made them their own personal buffet. Once I have all of the cabbage washed and the outer leaves pulled off, then I'm just going to go ahead and prep them for slicing. Now, I'm just cutting around the core and making slices that I can cut into thin strips. You want thin strips because they are easier to work with and they work better when you're making sauerkraut. So I just cut down until all I have left is the core, and then I just take these and I break them apart so that they're just thin pieces. You want that brine to be able to penetrate the pieces so that you can get sauerkraut quickly. If you don't do this, it can take a lot longer. So then I'm just cutting those thin strips. I shoot for 1/4 of an inch or maybe even less, because like I said, you want them to be nice and thin to make the process go faster. You can leave it in long strips if you want, and I did for some of it, but some of them I kept for shorter strips, like the ones that I'm cutting here. So then I just go through this process with all of the heads of cabbage that I had, even the very tiny ones. Now, I don't know if you can kind of see some of them lying there. Some of them are not much bigger than a Brussels sprout, but they don't have a very large core either. So while I don't get much off of them, I also am not losing near as much to the inside core. And like I said, they didn't get as big as I wanted, so I'm just working with what I have. And my goal is to not have to go buy cabbage for this process, so I'm hoping I have enough here to make at least a quart jar of sauerkraut. After I get all of the sauerkraut cut up, then I sprinkle 1 tablespoon of salt over the top and leave it sit for 15 minutes. Then I come back and I start working all of the cabbage. Now, I find several different methods work for this. It just depends on what you find the easiest or what is not going to wear you out, because this process takes about 10 to 15 minutes. So you're just going to massage those cabbage leaves and get them to start releasing their juice. So in this method, I just take my fist and I'll start grinding it down into them, as you can see here, or I'll grab handfuls and I'll just kind of squish it through my hands and massage it out of my hands until it is starting to release its juices. And like I said, this takes about 10 to 15 minutes in my experience, and I don't do this constantly. I was working on this while I fed my daughter a snack, so I'd have little breaks in between to let my arms rest and not be so tired. The other thing about this process is you want a counter or a surface that is lower than a traditional counter. Here, this setup of sitting on a bar stool and then placing the bowl on another bar stool was almost perfect. I didn't have to extend my shoulders up. I wasn't reaching super far down and leaning over, so I wasn't hurting my back. It was just a really good setup, especially since this process takes so long and can be so physically demanding of your arms and your hands. After 10 to 15 minutes and your cabbage has released its juice, then it's time to go ahead and transfer it into your jar. You're going to want to make sure that this jar is clean and sterilized before you move your cabbage over. And you're going to drop your cabbage in, and then you're going to take something like the back of a wooden spoon and you're going to pack your cabbage pieces down because you're wanting to get all of the air out that you can. So then you'll just rinse and repeat this process, doing another layer and pushing it down with that wooden spoon. And you'll do this until your jar is about 2 inches of headspace left at the top. And then you're going to go ahead and put your brine in after that. So this, I just do a handful or two at a time. It kind of depends how much you're comfortable with when it comes to packing it down. And you can kind of figure out what works best for you and how much you can pack down at one time. This amount of cabbage took me a quart jar and a pint jar. And I might have overfilled my quart jar a little bit, but my pint jar wasn't as full as it could have been. So then I just pack this down here for the final time before I will go ahead and I will do my pint jar as well. And just like with the quart jar, I'm going to pack this pint jar so that it's nice and tight and you are getting all the air bubbles out as much as you can. I find that a wooden spoon works the best for this, but you might have another utensil in your house that works well. I find wood is a good option for this rather than metal or glass. But again, this is just because I have a lot of wooden spoons in my home, so you might be able to find another option to also pack down this cabbage so that it is nice and tight and getting all of the air out of the jars in between the cabbage pieces. Now, I decided to go ahead and use the juice from the cabbage in my pint jar rather than my quart jar. If you have enough to do all of your jars or your whole jar, that is fantastic. I just didn't have quite enough, so I ended up having to make a brine for my quart jar, which I'll show you in a little bit. So for the brine, I'm going to take 1 quart of water, 4 cups of water, and 2 tablespoons of salt. And then to dissolve the salt into the water, I'm just going to shake this jar so that it all dissolves. You can heat it up on the stove to help dissolve that salt if you want, and then cool it down before adding it to your cabbage, but I have room temperature water that I can just add it to and then shake in this jar to get the same effect. And then I'm just going to fill this up to 1 inch of headspace. I'm going to want to make sure that I leave plenty of room to be able to put in my weight, which I did not, and I ended up having to pour off some of my brine. I made the mistake too of adding additional to my pint, and I should not have done that. I should have just added the weight and it would have worked out perfectly. So I have these little glass weights. These certainly aren't necessary. You can absolutely use a cabbage leaf and a piece of the core to help hold it down, which is what I had to do with this pint jar because my weight wouldn't quite fit. I like to use venting canning lids then to top these off, but if you don't have them and if you're just starting out with fermenting, I wouldn't recommend getting them until you know you're going to continue. You can just cover it with a paper towel and a rubber band so that it can burp itself throughout the process. Then I set these 2 jars in my fermenting corner for 7 days until I will taste them to see if they're ready to go in the fridge. After 7 days, it was time to go ahead and taste my sauerkraut and see what I thought of it. So I just went ahead and removed that fermenting lid and the weight. Now I'm going to take the weight out, and you might notice there's a little bit of sauerkraut on top. That's totally okay. A little bit sometimes floats to the top, but you just throw that out and rinse off your weight. So I went ahead and tasted it, and I was happy with the taste of this sauerkraut. So I went ahead and I put a regular lid on it and popped it in the fridge.